Greetings! Welcome to the Devlog for hot dogs, horseshoes, and hand grenades. We're going to start off as always with a quick sound check. Make sure your speakers aren't up too high. Wonderful. So what have we got for you this week? Well, we've got a special devlog to cover some of our upcoming Meat Fortress weapon implementations. So today's video is going to be focused on the ones that you see in front of you here that are the closest to our sort of real world weapons platforms, and I'm going to talk about what had to change about them in terms of translating them from Team Fortress 2 and some of their cartoon logic over to H3. Models had to be modified, cartridges had to be designed and such. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. And we're actually going to start with the one that probably has the most nonsensical animation of all of the TF2 firearms, which is the Scout's scattergun. Now, in TF2, we view the gun from this perspective, and the way this firearm works in that game is that you simply fire 6 shots in a semi-automatic way, and then just rack the lever 6 times, ejecting 6 shells that came from nowhere to be able to fire it again. And so I went through a bunch of, this was the one that was probably the most indecisive in terms of how it should function, and went through a number of iterations, and what I basically settled on is the idea that this is a sort of internal rotary action, double barrel lever action firearm. In that we basically, we take our shell here, which is, this is a 13 caliber, or 13 gauge short shotgun shell. And we're going to insert 6 of them into the loading port. Yes, this loading port and ejection port were always on this model. They just weren't visible because of the view we have of it in game. Now I've had to change it because it was absolutely tiny, and for having the weapon this size, both of these ports on the model would have barely fit a 45 ACP round, and that didn't seem right. So they have been carefully adjusted up. So then we rack our shotgun. We can actually see all the rounds stuffed in there, and now both of these barrels are loaded, so we can now fire twice like so, and then when we rack, we get 2 shells ejecting from it. Wonderful. So that is our scattergun. Let's go ahead and spawn ourselves some bots to test things out on. Even though I've scaled up the shells, this still has a pretty wide choke on it. So you'll notice that the scattergun has a bit of a wider spread than the sort of quote-unquote realistic shotguns in the game. Also, we can rack to load the 2 chambers and then stuff 2 more rounds. So this is technically a 6+2 weapon in H3. You will notice, however, there's a bit of a problem. I'm going to hold it like this, and then you tell me what you see. What's wrong with this? That's right, we have completely unusable back sights. If we actually pull this up to aim, there's no angle we can hold this where we can line up the front and the back sight, which means that when you pull it up and line up with your front sight, you then want to aim down a bit, like so. Boom. Oh, and I'm still doing that, where I still fire 1 shot and rack it, ejecting 1 fired and 1 unfired shell. So still having to fight that reflex a bit. Blammo! So there you have it. There is our scattergun. Wonderful stuff. So what next? What next? Let's talk about, well, let's just go shotgun to shotgun. So you will notice immediately that while the scattergun here has a new sort of illustrative looking shell to go with it, the other weapons here still are using sort of H3's realistic ammo. And the reason for that is that I've been developing this in parallel with everything else, and I was terrified of accidentally leaking files into the main game. And so what I made sure to do throughout the entire testing process for this was just to use existing ammo types, and I've just now begun the process of subbing in the custom ammo that I've made for each of these weapons. Hence why we get a, this is, what is it, the 23 by 75 millimeter shell for the shotgun. So let's rack this back. Look at that. Put one up there in the chamber. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so this one required a little more model changes than the scattergun, actually. There's no real complete interior geo on this model, and the tube for actually fitting the model was a little bit too small, so subtle modification required to fit the shells in. But this one wasn't onerous. This one only took about half a day to get how I needed it. Blam! Oh, only winged him there. Oh, wonderful. So yeah, and granted, as I've been using these sort of fake ammos, I've been trying to load in something for early game sort of balance testing of about the power and size of what the actual weapon will use. So this obviously just has a incredibly thick barrel, so it felt like the ammo that from the Chaos 23, roughly speaking, although it'll end up being, as you can see here, a slightly shorter shell, will end up being what this will be loaded with. On to our next one. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Scout's pistol. This was actually, it's funny, when I initially got these models, I was super enthused, I was ready to go to modify them, and I was like, all right, let's take a look at the models. And so I opened up the Scout's pistol. This was the first one I opened up for doing this project, and I almost immediately panicked, because it had dawned on me the level of model modification that was going to be necessary to do this. Because this model, the version of it that's actually in TF2, has, other than a very simplified magazine that dumps out, no moving parts at all. There's no moving hammer, the slide doesn't move, nothing. Basically, it's just when you're playing TF2, it just kicks back fast enough that you don't really notice that the slide isn't moving. And so I had to, if we pull this open, had to model the interior geo of the slide, give it a chamber, give it a loading ramp, and then that sort of front geo there to actually make this something that could make visual sense, as well as give it a complete hammer, make it so that the trigger could move, all the things necessary while still keeping the style, trying to basically make that modification as seamless as possible. And because this is the first, I decided to start with something really challenging. This was pretty nerve-wracking. Same thing with the magazine. I actually cut the little chamfer in there that is represented on its texture, made it hollow. This will end up having its own custom ammunition. Right now I think I just have 50 AE or something loaded into this, but this will in fact be getting 11 millimeter Manchevsky Kovovichev ammo for it. And let's take some shots. Oh, that vest is gonna stop it. Boom. It isn't though. And of course, over the process of designing exactly how big should these be, how much should they kick, a lot of it is being dictated not just by the look, but by the sound. All of TF2's weapon sounds are pretty intense. They're loud, they're really, really aggressive, especially compared to a quote-unquote more realistic firearm. And so I really responded to the way that they sound in terms of scaling them up a bit and giving them a lot more kick and power. There we go. Must have been hitting his armor. Oh, and there we have it. So there is our pistol. Oh, I love that sound. Blap. Next up, we have the Sniper's SMG. This one required not just a decent amount of modeling, but a decent amount of thinking in terms of figuring out how to make sure there was enough space for the required mechanical components in it. This is loosely based on, I believe, a MAT 49, but obviously we've got some oddities in the design, and that the ejection port isn't very large. It isn't lined up with the mag well. It's behind it, but we don't have a lot of spare receiver space here. And so what I basically did was model a bolt in here, as well as making it so that you can see through the firearm on the left side, and set it up as an open bolt SMG. So we basically cock the bolt and it sits back here behind where the magazine would be, and pulling the trigger causes it to snap forward, chamber around, and then fire. I think I've got like 500 SW or something like that in this, so this has a lot of punch and a lot of recoil to go with it. So this is very much a close range weapon, as it should be. I don't have tracers in there actually at the moment, so let's get some disabled bots. Actually, you know what, let's make it easier to see exactly what the spread on this is. Let's also see if this is actually 500 SW. Is it? Nope. Nope, it's not 500. Maybe it's 550 AE. Yes, there we go. Perfect. Wonderful. So there you have it. That is the Sniper's SMG. Honestly, I love using this, and you can make it a little more controllable to use by grabbing its 4 here. We don't have a stock, so you're not going to get shoulder stabilization, but this will dampen the recoil a bunch. Wonderful. There you have it. All right, and on to the next one. Let's get ourselves a few more disabled bots. This beaut, our Sniper's sniper rifle with just absolutely massive scope. I don't think I realized exactly how huge this felt until having it in game. But it's actually quite wonderful because it means the back lens is very large, makes it much easier for lining up and seeing what you're shooting at. And of course we have the red dot, which I had never noticed is actually modeled in here. Actually got to put like a glowing red bit there still. So you can totally end up hip firing this up close just using the red dot for guidance. It has no magazine. This is another one that actually required a lot of geometry modification for, because in the animation in TF2 we basically see it come up and then back down again, and that's it. And I wanted to make it actually have a full bolt action mechanism. So we've got this area that is cut in here. We've got a hammer that actually moves when it is cocked, like such. We have a chamber modeled in now, which I just right now have this temporarily using a 50 BMG. The custom round I'm going to give for it is about this wide but shorter. Insert that in there, like so. And boom! So obviously one shot at a time makes it pretty slow to use, so it's being given quite a lot of power, as you can see. Oop. That was so powerful, caused everything to lock up momentarily on my computer. I'm not quite sure why. Blap! Absolutely love using this one. Boom. Wonderful. Cool. And let's cover the last of our 6 example firearms that was, this one was the worst. I'm going to reset my scene first. All right, cleaned up test scene. So you might be asking, wait a minute, what do you mean the Revolver was the worst one to do out of them? It's a revolver. Surely it can't be weirder or harder than adding geo into a handgun or making the scattergun work. Well, it was, because despite this being a gorgeous design, wonderful proportions, flared, Nothing about this revolver makes any sense in physical space. The original model, that is. No component is lined up with another component in a logical way. The original TF2 model has no swing arm. The top cylinder, top chamber of the cylinder is not lined up with the barrel. The sizes don't make sense. There's no complete hammer. The ejection rod was strangely offset. I had to start over like 4 times working on this because of what I had to do to cut in this swing arm here and a new chamber that's correctly sized up there that actually lines up with the cylinder, actually have, as you can see here, have the ejector work, have the hammer come back and fire. This stunk. I resented this by the end of it. But what are you gonna do? Let's actually bring in a few wandering ones. Bam! Oh, and that's the other thing, because this flares at the top, it's impossible to line the backside and the front side up in a traditional fashion. And I would have to make the backside literally come up to like here to make that work correctly. So instead of lining this up like this, you actually line it up closer to like that to be able to aim with it. That's the best I can do. I didn't want to mess with the gorgeous silhouette of this design, and so you just have to remember that you have to aim it a little differently. So there we go. Blammo. What a great sound. You can spin it just like the other double action revolvers. Wonderful. So that is our firearms, and now just as a final bonus I wanted to show, I have also gotten all of the melee weapons working. I've got a couple of them sitting out here. I'm still tuning the exact volume of their impact sounds because, as I said, TF2 sounds are really over the top. They're really loud. They need to be recognizable under the sound of, 8 versus 8 players shooting at each other. And so I've been getting them to work in my impact system. We've got a bunch here. So let's just do this with disabled bots, actually. That'd be easier. So we've got our wrench here. Let's make sure this makes the right sound. Oh, couldn't even hear it. I love that, like, doosh noise. Blap. We've got our shovel from the soldier, which can stab. Oh, darn it. Like that. Oh, darn it. As well as cut joints off, because it's sharp. Whee! Goodbye. We've got possibly the most incredible melee impact sound ever made for a game in the form of the bat. Bonk! Love it. Oh, as I throw it out of my hand. Absolutely wonderful on that one. And I'm still obviously tuning these for the amount of damage they should do and such. And then lastly, we have this pain in my butt. I spent the better part of the other day doing this. This isn't quite as complex in terms of how I want this interaction. Eventually, I'm going to look back on this and try to get sort of full 2-axis spinning, but I have the initial single axis working. So the way this works is once it's in your hand, if you click the trigger, you will unlock it. Like so. You can toggle it. And then once it's unlocked, it'll respond to gravity and inertia as such. So you can flip it back around, lock it like so. You can click left and right on the touchpad or joystick to come to flip it 180 for a stabbing motion. Ha! Like so. I'm sure the spy loves doing that to the scout. You can come up and backstab with it. Whack. Whoop, like so. And then when you're done using it, you can, of course, unlock it and close it right back up. And there you have it. There is our Balisong. One more scout bat hit for good measure. Bonk. Ah, wonderful. Anywho, now that we've taken a look at all of that, let's jump out of VR and talk about all of the other stuff that still needs to get done to have this ready for the end of the month. Yo! So, gonna keep this in meat space part of the video a little short today, but I wanted to just get a couple things out to the community. For one, SteamVR just updated, and so it actually detects Rift S controllers correctly. And so I'm going to take that controller model, apply my sort of stylistic modification to it for the game, and get that in there. That'll go in the next full update, which I'll talk about in a moment. Beyond that as well, any users using Live for doing mixed reality. Apparently I broke some things when I switched over to the SteamVR input version of the SteamVR plugin for the game, and I'm currently in the process of getting that fixed. I was originally just going to try to restore the old behavior, but I got in touch with the Live devs and they sent me over the sort of official API, so I'm going to essentially put that in, do probably a test build with it with them to make sure it doesn't break anything else, and then that will also go into the next full release update, which at the moment is looking like it's going to be at the end of the month. I don't want to risk trying to, especially with all the stuff that I'm pulling apart, do a full software release in the midst of getting Meat Fortress together. I might end up doing some limited sort of test build forks for specific things over the course of the month, but they're not going to be a major release, just so you folks are prepared for that. Beyond those two little things, I'm still on target to have things ready for the 28th. There might be a few things related to the Meat Fortress play modes that aren't as refined as I want them to be or as fully fleshed out, just because various things along the way have ended up taking a little more time than I wanted to. But there will be a release on the 28th still, and it's still gonna have the full arsenal, and there'll be a whole bunch of things to do in the sandbox scene regardless. It's just probably gonna need a little bit of post-release love and tuning based on how things are going right now. So just so you folks are prepared. Anywho, I hope you enjoyed that sort of like preview both of the arsenal as well as the sort of like dive into what's going through my head when I'm thinking about adapting these into the game. And then in next week's devlog, we'll see a little more of the scene itself and playing around with the bots, as well as some of the sort of higher test arsenal that is being adapted, as well as some more rocket jumping. So, but I'm saving that one for next week. So, anywho, I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you all soon. Peace.